professionals. And I think we hear a lot that there's this perception that you can't have a job in our program without a PhD in nuclear physics, and that's just not accurate. We have immediate openings for high school graduates, two-year college graduates, grads, and PhDs. So I would just encourage you to open your horizons, think about what's in the realm of the possible here, and really encourage you to ask questions and participate in the afternoon session today and leading into the rest of the activities for the rest of the week. So with that, I will give Marty and Candice a chance to get settled up here, and we'll be going into the next session, a career conversation with EM's cleanup chief.
So let's see, our mics, are we hot? Are we good? Can you hear? All right, excellent. So you get to sort of move into our talk show format here. Did you enjoy that quick change? It's the magic of television here, right? So this is something new we're trying this year. And one, I think Candice is, one of the most inspiring leaders and really one of the most interesting career paths that I thought it was, I think it would be really beneficial to kind of dig into that for you, give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about, how you got to your current job leading the cleanup program, and I think give us all, I think, the benefit of some of the lessons and some of the 2020 hindsight maybe along the way. So I appreciate you subjecting yourself to this a bit. But I really do want to make sure that, as we go along, that if you have questions, we'll definitely build some time in as the end to kind of, make this into a broader discussion. So, so thanks for doing it.
Thank you for having me, Marty.
Absolutely. So, I guess I wanted to start, right? So, growing up in Nevada, early job, working at a casino, dealing blackjack, running for local elected office in your early 20s. So what in the world did you think that you would be doing, when you came out of college? What did you think that you were gonna be working in?
Well, I went to college to become a lawyer, and then I decided I didn't want to do that, and I wanted to be a dolphin trainer. But I had missed... As
many folks growing up in Nevada, yes. Such a, the sea life is so abundant there.
Yes. I had missed the deadline for exotic animal training in management school. So I moved home and started dealing. I went to a casino and said I could deal craps, and they didn't believe me, and so then they tested me out, and I got my first job as a craps dealer. And then I expanded to all the games. And then I couldn't decide what I wanted to do when I grew up. So the only thing I knew I was really passionate about was public service. My father was a pastor. He was also a cop. He was also on the school board. My mom was the head of social services for our county. And so I just really wanted to give back. So I spoke with the incumbent in my district for the county commission because I went to high school with his son and we were all friends. And I asked if he was going to run. He said he was, but that he wasn't going to campaign. And so I decided I was going to go ahead and campaign. My mom did not decide she was going to vote for me until September, I think. So I won the primary by a landslide 7 votes. And it got challenged in court. That was my first entree as a pretend lawyer where I had to defend the election results in court. And then ultimately I was elected as a county commissioner at the age of 23. And that's really how I got into this business, because Nye County, Nevada is home of what was then called the Nevada Test Site, now the Nevada National Security Site, and what was then the Yucca Mountain Project. And so I became really involved in these issues. I heard a lot from my community about the things that mattered to them. I was fortunate enough to get to serve as a representative to the Energy Communities Alliance. And that's where I really started to gain a level of depth of understanding of what was happening across the entire complex.
So ultimately, is that what took you to Washington?
Well, I went to work on the Yucca Mountain project, and then that shut down, and so I applied for, I stopped counting at 75 jobs before I finally was able to land a job at the Office of Environmental Management, which I had previously applied for that same job and been rejected a year.
75 jobs, not locally, but back in Washington.
All over.
All over the country.
Yeah, it was just haphazard. But, ultimately fate or whatever led me to the Office of Environmental Management as a public affairs specialist. And
now, how old were you when you moved to Washington?
well, I started my federal career when I was about 2008. I got to do the math. No, I was about 29. And so I think I moved here when I was 30.
Wow, okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
So now, from that time as an elected official, now looking backwards, did you learn anything during that? I mean, that had to be hard being a 23-year-old elected official in that sort of environment. Did you learn anything that has sort of helped you in your current job or along the way?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as a local elected official, you're dealing with everything from what roads are going to get paved to what sort of communication system you're going to procure for your sheriff's office to how you're going to do master planning and the whole gamut of issues that go with running a county or a town. And I knew none of it. So what I learned is how to identify the right people who did know things and how to ask good questions and then make decisions. I learned how important it was to engage people with the exact opposite viewpoint of what you have so that you can make sure to kind of pressure test your ideas. I learned the importance, of course, of building coalitions. I was not that great at it as a county commissioner. I didn't accomplish as much as I probably could have if I had been a little more focused on building those coalitions. But yeah, I think those are some of my main lessons.
Yeah, how to spot a concealed handgun at a county meeting.
Yes,
right?
yeah, I did. They weren't concealed. They were just on the hip.
And, during that time, you had some pretty exciting, local issues to deal with, right? I mean, you had some involvement with the FBI, with law enforcement, right? So this is a complete non sequitur, but maybe I think the group would appreciate hearing about your adventures with the FBI.
Okay, so Nye County has legalized prostitution. I was the chair of the licensing
Wouldn't it
and
be awesome if we
liquor
ended
board.
the story right there? All right, moving on.
So Heidi Fleiss, who is the Hollywood madam, as some may recall, wanted to build a brothel in Nevada. She's a convicted felon, so I asked our district attorney's office if I should meet with her or not. They suggested I wear a wire, so I did. So I worked with the FBI and I wore a wire. She did nothing wrong. Other brothel owners, one tried to bribe me, so I wore a wire on him, and he was known for public corruption, suspected in the past. He ultimately he pled guilty and was never in the brothel business again.
Now, what was your FBI code name?
Chuckles, because I laugh when I'm nervous, Marty.
And no joke, right? You had them on tape talking about doing you harm if you didn't cooperate, right? I mean... Yeah,
they were planning my demise.
So, lest you think that, Candice is just a charming, smiling, cooperative public official, right? There's ice water in her veins, right? Knowing that organized crime was thinking about doing her harm, wore a wire, going back in, got it taped, put the bad guys in jail, before she started her career in EM. So I always think that's a very instructive story about Candice, right? Spine of steel, right? Ice water in her veins. So never doubt it.
But don't worry, I don't have to wear a wire. Everyone in EM is very high integrity.
There you go. Well, you got that out of the way early in your career. One of the things as you have gone through your career at EM, you've really kind of gone back and forth between what I would say are some really meaningful individual performer roles in charge of initiative or an expert on a certain topic, communications or stakeholder or HR, and leading organizations, right? Even up until recently, you were sort of an individual performer in charge of the Clean Up to Clean Energy initiative. And so you go from that sort of running your own initiative, kind of your own thing, to being head of the cleanup program with everybody reporting to you. So talk a little bit about how you kind of change back and forth between, that mindset of being an individual performer and, leading an organization the size of EM.
Well, I think that I have often learned the most when I've been an individual contributor working for various principals, because I've been able to see how they approach decision-making, how they approach leadership. And so it's been really, I've been very blessed. I've been able to work for 3 different deputy secretaries, I don't know, a half a dozen probably assistant secretaries or equivalents in EM, maybe more. And so it's been extraordinarily helpful to my development to be able to be engaged at that level without being responsible for the ultimate decision. In some ways, it's the best job because you don't have that level of accountability, but you get to kind of promote your ideas and see what floats. And so that was very helpful. I love being in leadership positions because you are able to make the most impact, and you're able to really kind of marshal your team towards what you think are the most important goals. But it certainly is a different level of responsibility and stress, I'll just say. But it's fantastic. So most of my career has been in those individual contributor roles. My first, what they call -1 job, which is, whatever your org code is, -1. So my first -1 job was as the Chief Human Capital Officer. For
the whole department?
For the Department of Energy, yeah. But I gave that up when I was fortunate enough to get pregnant with my child. And I live pretty far outside of Washington, D.C., so I chose to take a step back in my career so that I could focus on my family. And then COVID happened, which enabled a lot more flexible work arrangements. And so that's part of why I've been able to step up again into a leadership role and hopefully be able to continue to make a meaningful difference on a larger scale.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, right? So you think about all the parts and pieces of what EM is, right? There's a human capital element, there's a stakeholder element, there's a communications element, there's a technical and operations element. And you think about the jobs that you had over the years. I don't know that you noticed it at the time, but you were sort of becoming sort of the $6 million man, right? You were taking all of the parts and pieces of what made the necessary pieces of the leader of EM and sort of accumulating them. Looking back, I mean, did you see it that way? I mean, did it have any rhyme or reason, or did it seem kind of organic?
It was very organic. Most of my job changes within the federal government, I'll make a pitch as to why you should want to be a Fed. You have so much flexibility in terms of taking on new roles, and you're able to amass probably greater levels of responsibility faster than in the typical contractor role. And so for the vast majority of my job changes have been at the request of leadership. If leadership needed me to go do a detail out at Hanford, I packed my bags and went out to Hanford. When leadership wanted me to give up what was one of my favorite jobs as the APDAS, the Associate Principal Deputy of Assistant Secretary for Corporate Services, and I was asked to go work for a brand new Deputy Secretary who I had never met, I said okay. So my history is just answering the call to service wherever leadership needs me to plug in. I've been fortunate that has resulted in this diverse level of experience. And I'm fortunate that I'm now in a position, senior enough, I don't think they're going to be plucking me from it for a while. So I get to maybe stay put for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Like, if I were to boil down a strategy from, or an approach from your career, it really has been like saying yes when you get the call, right? And not all of those moves made sense at the time, but I think what has shown through to the leadership is your commitment for the program and your ultimate, I think, willingness to put the mission ahead of whatever career objectives you thought made sense at the time, right?
Yeah.
So, how much has that been your philosophy, right? Of just saying yes and jumping in?
Yeah, that's been my guiding principle, in part because I don't have a grand strategy for my career. So in absence of a plan, I guess just go with the flow. Not always the best in nuclear world, but it's worked out for my career. But yeah, I just have really always felt an obligation to my leadership, whoever that may be at the time, that I help them advance the mission in whatever way they best saw me fit into the mission. When I was a public affairs specialist, the then assistant secretary asked me to take on additional duties working on Hanford-specific technical items. I have no technical background, but she just saw me as an expediter that could actually partner with the technical team and be able to then get things moving forward. And through that experience, I was able to gain a lot of relatively deep technical knowledge about one of our biggest site and one of our most complicated sites. And so that has also really helped move my career forward, is while I have amassed a breadth of experience, I've also gone deep when I've been given the chance to try to master any particular subject.
So now, looking back to 29-year-old Candice as she is applying for 75 DOE jobs before one hits, is there any advice that you would give that person? I think many versions of that person are sitting here in the room. Do you wish you thought about things differently? Do you wish you had made different decisions or made a move quicker or slower? Is there anything that advice that you would give that version of yourself?
One, I would have tried to complete an advanced degree sooner. I have made multiple starts, and then my jobs have always been so busy I haven't been able to complete it with the level of excellence I would want to. So that may never be in my future until I retire, but I do think that would be beneficial if I could go back. Another is, while I was super fortunate to come to headquarters, and I have greatly appreciated the opportunity. When I was single and child-free, I wish I had spent more time in the field than I did. I started in the field on Yucca Mountain, but that was a little bit different since we weren't actually operating. And I've done, one detail at Hanford for just about 3 months. But I think it's so important to understand both the policy aspect as well as the operations aspect, to understand the different pressures that, coming from different situations brings to bear on decision making. And I think that I would be even more well-rounded if I had had more of that experience. But on the whole, I had really great mentors from the start who gave me great career advice, like focus on the mission and the promotions will come. Make sure that you're building your network both across your peers as well as, mentors or other advocates. As we know, Marty, Kristen, Mike, Colin, we've all been peers, and now we're all in different parts of this enterprise at more senior levels. And so that kind of peer cohort has been so essential to our mutual success, I would say, as well as learning from those who have been there before. I've had, I don't even know how many unofficial mentors who have been kind enough to give me their time and attention and help me understand both the history as well as how they approach problem solving. That's been really impactful.
So let's talk about that, because I think that's often it's a difficult thing, right? To find good mentors, to know how to utilize those mentors And it's honestly something that never stops, right? I mean, I certainly benefit from mentorship today, and I know you do as well. So talk a little bit about, I mean, did you recognize that that mentorship was happening as it was happening? Did you actively seek that out? And how do you maintain those mentor relationships that I know continue to be valuable for you over the decades?
Yes, so I did intentionally seek it out. Probably my first mentor in the federal government system was someone named Todd Schneider, who many of you know because he used to be EM2. And Todd and I worked at Yucca Mountain together, and he's the one that gave me his little, in fact, he wrote talking points for me today, but I don't remember them all, because he has his like rules for career management.
So your first mentor, just think about that, right? Candice's first mentor was supporting her even today for this discussion, right? So, you know, truly, as you're thinking about things, right, like never stop looking for those opportunities here the decades on. I mean, I think it's funny, but it's also pretty powerful, right?
Yeah. And then when I was coming to the Office of Environmental Management, somebody at Yucca Mountain told me to seek out John Mocknick and Jim Owendoff. Most of you don't know who those people are, but many of you do. So I sought those two people out, and Jim Owendoff, I didn't realize what a big deal he was when I just came up saying, hi, I was told to meet you. And he immediately introduced me to like everybody in EM. He walked me across the entire Forrestal building, and you know, with any organization, there's often kind of different groups, right, that kind of are more collegial or more involved with one another than others. And one of the first things he told me was like, really build your network across all of the various groups, and don't wear your boss's stripes. Don't make it seem like you think that because you're staffing so-and-so or you're the speechwriter for so-and-so that makes you equal in stature, because that can breed some hostility, especially amongst your peer groups, and even about people that are, you know, especially if you're, like I was a speechwriter for an assistant secretary as a relatively junior person, and there were multiple levels between that, right? And so making sure that you are just showing that you're there to do a good job and you're not there to try to play internal politics games or anything like that, I think was really impactful. And then, like I said, I've had multiple deputy secretaries, assistant secretaries, heads of various offices across EM. The head of the Office of Project Management is another one of my mentors, Paul Bosco, that I just actively seek out, particularly people who have different experience than me, and especially in areas where I'm weakest, where I think that I need to develop. But also, I've had lots of mentors in an area where I'm stronger, like on the communication side. I'll never be as good of a communicator as Marty or Mike or Kristen or Colin, but you all still continue to mentor me in that area as well. So I've just tried to have a very broad base of mentors. I've never participated in a formal mentoring program, but it's just more about identifying people who are willing to roll the dice, that you are willing to roll up your sleeves and do the work to be the best that you can be. And almost any leader in an organization, when they see somebody that's eager to advance the mission over self, is going to be willing to invest in those people.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, one of the most powerful things you said was, you know, when you focus on the mission, the promotions will come. But if you focus on the promotions, they often don't come, right? And I think that really has been one of the things that's marked your career. Sometimes it's saying yes to a 6-month assignment and then another 6-month assignment and then another 6-month assignment, and you kind of get whiplash, right? But, you know, I think your commitment to the ultimate success of sometimes the program, sometimes the department, you know, has really served you well.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it became a little bit of a running joke, which actually became a hindrance for me, that I couldn't keep a job because they would move me around so frequently. Right. So when I asked for this role, leadership wanted to kind of make sure that I was really willing to commit for the long haul, which I am. I had to point out that I was not looking to move most of those other times. But, you know, there is a balance you have to strike, both in focusing on the mission over self. You're still your best advocate. You still have to make sure that leadership understands your contribution, but you have to do it in a way that is really about how you're advancing the mission and not how you're chasing the promotion, as well as, like I said, trying to both broaden your experience as well as dig deep into various subject matters.
And I know that, as you've gone into this job, you're really focused on, the workforce and the talent in EM going forward. And now that you're in the chair, has that experience sort of, changed your perspective on, the priorities or approaches that EM needs to put in place to, develop and retain that workforce of the future?
I don't know that it's changed by being in this chair, because I had already been very invested in seeing this program be successful. But certainly there's a different level of urgency now that I'm actually responsible for filling those various roles. And I've had additional learning opportunities as I've engaged with contractors at a higher level. I don't know if Ken Reuter's still in the room, but he's one of my go-tos on a whole variety of topics, as well as several other contractors. And so I certainly think that I have broadened my understanding of the urgency as well as the potential avenues for us to try to address it, but it's something that we're all working on together, because I don't think anyone has quite unlocked or whatever, broken that code, whatever Absolutely. The right phrase is.
Well, and you mentioned, somewhere along the line starting a family, and I know, it's interesting, to a lot of us who kind of went through that progression, right? How has being a mom kind of changed, your perspective or changed your approach, to this whole journey?
Well, it certainly pulls into view your priorities even more than perhaps before. One of my first and favorite ever bosses told me that one of my limiting factors was my need for perfection and my unwillingness to let things go or delegate. I can't say that I've completely solved that, but things are not perfect with a toddler, right? Like, it's just, you just have to go with it. And probably kids of every age. I don't know. I'm only up to 4 at this point.
Well, I have a 19-year-old. It's still chaos.
Okay. And so, I have to delegate, both because I'm in a bigger role, but even before that, I had to involve others even in my individual contributor role, because I have to make the most effective and efficient use of my time. It was not unusual as a single person staffer to work 80 to 100 hours a week on average. It's obviously not possible. I do that some weeks, but I can't do that every week with my child. And so being able to just kind of really prioritize what's most important, where I can make the most individual difference versus giving it to somebody else on my team. And then just, that kind of time management and prioritization. And then in terms of why we're here, like Kristen was talking about, I mean, I've always cared about the mission. I've always cared about cleaning up our communities, but obviously it takes on a whole different meaning when you're thinking about not just the next generation generically, but your little boy or girl and how you're trying to make the world a better place for them.
It makes a difference, right, as you're changing your perspective and thinking about who you're doing this for.
Yes.
Right? It personalizes it.
Yes.
Right. I was thinking too, you talked about not being a technical person, not having an advanced degree. One of the most interesting things, and gets back to what Kristen was talking about in her opening, that the notion that you need to have your PhD in physics to work for EM. So many of EM's challenges now, the challenges ahead aren't technical. They're regulatory. They're communicating risk. They're stakeholder. And I'm really interested in your perspective on, the importance of, beyond the technical, that communication as a skill that EM needs going forward.
Well, I will say for all of the technical people in the room, we still need you too. There are still technical challenges to be resolved, and often there's an interplay, right? Regulatory issues are often underpinned by having technical solutions that you can get the buy-in from the regulators on. But to your point, the major technical issues have largely been resolved, and especially when you're looking at a headquarters type role. At the beginning of EM, it was only headquarters as they were trying to figure out how they even approach this massive cleanup. And so now we're really thinking about how can we drive a risk-based approach that is fully protective of health and humans and the environment, but also responsible for the taxpayers. The cleanup liability is like the third or fourth, depending on who you talk to, largest taxpayer liability in the nation. And so what we do, what decisions we make on the level of cleanup, our approaches to cleanup matter greatly. And a big part of getting the regulatory alignment is, of course, making sure that you're communicating in a transparent and understandable way to the wide variety of stakeholders, tribes, communities, Congress, of course, who has to give us all of the funding, to make sure that they both understand what we're planning on doing, why that makes sense from a technical and regulatory standpoint, and demonstrating continued progress so that Congress and the taxpayers will continue to entrust us with $8+ billion a year, which is a big responsibility we all share.
Now, I want to give you a fair warning, right? We're coming up on the portion of our show for audience participation and questions. So think about those questions for Candice as I dig in for at least one more. I could certainly lob questions at Candice all afternoon, but think about those questions that you'd like to ask here in a minute as well. But for me, as I think about your career and the lessons for me, for my team, for all of us, people think about preparing for leadership as leading bigger and bigger teams and bigger organizations, right? That it's somehow linear, that I have a group of 5 and now I have a group of 25 and then 100 and then 1,000, right? And so often it doesn't work that way, right? It really is, and that's one of the reasons that we were focused in this session on some of those supplementary career experiences that you're going to hear about in the next panel. But I guess as advice to this group as they think about their careers, any additional words of wisdom as they think about assignments to take on and how to approach those opportunities?
Well, as you noted, you're going to be covering this in the next panel, but I would highly recommend that you try to broaden your experience. When you become a manager of a team that you've been on for a long time, it can be a greater challenge. Those people are your peers, and now suddenly you're their boss. Also, you only know that group's way of thinking. You don't know how other people might tackle a similar problem or the same problem but from a different perspective. Maybe, the people in the budget office are going to think about the $3 billion we're spending at site X very differently than the technical people. And so making sure that you have that broad base of experience, I think, is super important. And then I think probably just the other things that we've covered, but if you want Todd's talking points, I have them in the back, because there's more, I just can't remember.
All right, so questions for Candice from this group? Yes, come on up to the mic so we can hear you.
Okay, hello Candice, thank you for all this. Just having run for elected office in the past, do you ever think about maybe it's time to do that again?
No.
No. That's my whole question, thank you.
Best job I ever had was being an elected official. It's also I didn't understand, even at the local level, how little I understood as a pretty involved person about all of the interplay on making those decisions. And while I think I've gotten better at building coalitions, it's a game of horse trading that is not where I'm the strongest. I tend to be not overly black and white anymore. I was back then, but it's just really, it's not my strongest suit to necessarily want to do those puts and takes instead of pursue the best policy that I think you need in any given situation. And that's why I love the federal government on the administrative side, is that we can just go do what we think is the best thing. And of course, there's building coalitions as part of that. And of course, there's learning as you go. But it's not the same if you do this if you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. That's important. That's what keeps our nation moving forward. It's just not something that I'm particularly skilled at.
Other questions? Yes?
HII representing.
We always appreciate the HII here.
Hello, good afternoon. My question is related to the demographic of personnel within EM, and just out of curiosity, what estimated percentage or locations of personnel or different projects where they have PEs?
They have PEs?
Professional engineers.
Oh, sorry.
If any.
I mean, I think a large number of our feds are PEs on the technical side. I would guess 30% maybe, I don't know. On the contractor side, I don't know that I know that well enough. But most of so at the federal side, we typically have scientists or engineers. Not every engineer, of course, pursues their license as a PE, but most of them that I know do, at least. It's not necessary for a federal job per se, because you're not doing the hardcore, you're not stamping documents, right? But it certainly lends some credibility. And then you've got other specialties like contracting specialists or budget specialists or things like that. So I would say it skews 60 to 70%, if not more, technical. And of that, most of that's engineers. And of that, I would say a good subset are PEs, but that is completely made up, so don't quote me.
Thank you.
One more right here, sure.
Hi, I was wondering, I'm going to do a follow-up on the engineering questions. In terms of gaining experience as an engineer within EM, you just mentioned that there's perhaps a discrepancy between doing proper engineering plans and doing some of the more technical or perhaps bureaucratic work of being a federal employee. How does that lend credibility to gaining experience as a professional engineer?
So that's a great question. I think you would have to figure out what you want to do ultimately in your career. If what you want to do is be the chief engineer building bridges or building, designing a nuclear power plant, federal experience is helpful, but I wouldn't stay in the federal job too long. It's helpful to understand how decisions are made. Even if you're just a hardcore engineer, somebody's still approving whatever you're doing at some level, and there's always an element of non-technical things that play into that, as well as the fact that I mentioned as a Fed, you can also often amass higher levels of responsibility to put on your resume. I was, we do have chief engineers, so I was the chief engineer for an $8 billion a year program. That looks impressive on a resume, but if what you really want to do is do the hardcore engineering, the federal job is probably not the one I'd want to stay in for more than, 5 or so years, because you want to make sure that you're still demonstrating that actual doing the drawings or whatever engineers do, doing the calcs and everything that you have to do as an engineer, so that you don't kind of lose that edge. But I don't know, you might hear from another panel, if you've got an engineer, a better answer on that.
Yeah, we have several engineers coming up in subsequent panels, so stay tuned. Yes, over here.
Thank you so much for the great conversation, Candice. I guess as a non-technical person myself and supporting the EM mission through workforce management, how do you best feel that those with the non-technical backgrounds can kind of learn more about the EM mission and budgets and more technical subjects as we continue to move along?
That's a great question. I do think that it's important for whatever role you serve to actually get connected to the core of the mission somehow, right? So that's where, for me at least, details have been really helpful. I've also, and this isn't normal, I don't even know if this is technically allowed, but I've also just kind of volunteered. Like I was on a detail from Yucca Mountain to the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, and on my day off for your AWS day, where you get one day every 2 weeks, I would kind of moonlight over in EM trying to help with things. In my last individual contributor role in EM, I moonlighted as the chief of staff over in the Office of Clean Energy Development and Deployment. So that is, when I was at Yucca, I also moonlighted as the NEPA compliance officer at one point in time. Now, again, that's not like an advertised opportunity, so you have to build your network and get people to say, yeah, I really could use your help, and be willing to put in that effort. But beyond that, I think details are really great. I think, making sure that you identify mentors that have a different perspective than you, and when you get a chance, do get out to a site or two, actually get boots on the ground and understand what they're doing, and then build that peer network of people that are on the technical side. And by the way, they can learn a lot from you on the workforce management side, right? And so it can be and I know you guys already have a fantastic peer network through your, through the Pathways program. And so that's a great start to building that network, and just keep doing that. And I know big things are in your future.
Yeah, couple more over here, come on up.
Hi Candice, thanks for sharing a bit about your journey. I've been to a couple of these EM and cleanup themed workshops, and I know that a lot of discussion is around mentoring. And as someone that's in their early career, I've always kind of felt a disconnect between people talking about mentoring and how you actually do that, because from my perspective, we're all very busy. A lot of the leadership is very, very busy. People that you may want to mentor you, how do you get to that point where you're not just coming up and asking them for a favor or bothering them? Like how do you start that exchange so it is an exchange and not just asking somebody to help you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my first mentor in EM was actually Jim Owendoff. I asked him to join the formal mentoring program with me as my mentor, and he said, no, that's too much paperwork, I'm too busy, not doing it. But I'm happy to talk with you. And so he and I would go for, walkabouts, as he would call them, once a week or once every couple of weeks. And he'd just say, so what's on your mind? What are you dealing with? Now, every mentor has a different approach, but I think being willing to just come forth and ask, make sure you ask somebody outside of your chain of command, because, I wish I could mentor more people, but when you're in the chain of command, you have to have some sensitivity to that. So make sure you ask somebody outside of your chain of command, but be willing to ask. Be willing to make sure you put in the work up front, that when you do have those times to engage, you've got questions on your mind about what you think would be most impactful. Also, just be willing to kind of be open to how they might want to steer the conversation, because maybe once they've agreed to be your mentor, they're going to be kind of watching you and seeing where you're thriving or where you're struggling, and so they may be seeing something you're not. And then, for me at least, I've always had multiple mentors at the same time, because you may only get, once a month with somebody, but if you have 4 or 5 people, now you're once a week or more getting kind of varied advice. I often have mentors who think the exact opposite of one another, which is really helpful in thinking through the various options. So, you have to be aggressive in a polite way, of course, but aggressive about trying to seek those folks out. And honestly, most of us are just so flattered. We'd love to help where we can.
One more back here, we'll give you the last word.
So I wanted to hear it from you. We know that Yucca Mountain never really took off. What's your relationship with the NRC, and how does EM work with the NRC?
I cannot think of a better question for you.
I want to hear. I could Google this. I want to hear your side of the story.
Wait, my relationship as Candice or as a former Yucca employee?
Just whatever you want to talk about.
Marty was joking because before I came back to EM, however long ago that was now, a year and a half, I was a chief of staff to one of the NRC commissioners. And so that was my stint, 6 months, my 6-month stint over at the NRC. And that really gave me a better perspective of both what they do well and where they could potentially even learn from us. EM, of course, has some activities that are regulated by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and/or by the agreement states that they give the authority to. You know, the NRC is got some of the top technical experts in the world. They also typically, especially on the reactor side, are dealing with, you know, until we talk about advanced reactors, which they haven't licensed a whole lot of, we're talking about 1 or 2 designs, right? And so they're able to really kind of dial in how long it's going to take them to review those things. And so there's a lot more precision in how they approach some of their work because it's not so varied and it's more well understood, I would say, and kind of standard. For EM, of course, sometimes we dig something up and we didn't know there was going to be a Jeep there or whatever that story is from Los Alamos. And so we have a lot of variables that are less able to be accounted for. But I think we have a really great relationship with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Kristen just hired a former NRC commissioner, in fact, to lead our waste management division.
Which is pretty cool, right?
It's
To
very
bring
cool.
somebody in from NRC to lead that part of your organization.
Yeah, it is very cool. And so I think that there's a lot of mutual admiration and learning that we can do as organizations while understanding that the technical issues that we grapple with are slightly different in many cases. I don't know if that answered your question or not. I've been dodging Yucca, but I'm happy to be more head-on if you'd like.
So would you consider EM to be more like operations than NRC?
Oh, for sure. I mean, we have the operations and the self-regulatory aspect, right? And so that we have actual accountability for delivering on the mission, and NRC can be purely focused on the regulatory aspect.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, with that, please join me in thanking Candice for
you all.
bearing your soul to us here today.
Thank you, Marty.
And I'll invite Kristen and our next panel up to the stage.
So while the next set of panelists is coming up and joining us, I will just check in on everybody's early workforce bingo card and see if anyone had FBI wearing a wire on their card. So you can go ahead and check that one off for you. And, you know, while we're waiting for everyone to come up, you can think about how you're going to pitch to your book club, how everyone should read the Oppenheimer book. I highly encourage that. We can follow the agenda. So Colin, JJ, Joe, and Allison. We'll split. Well, you guys are already here. We'll just go back and forth. That's fine. We can go back and forth. That's fine. You're on this side. I don't want anyone to have a safety moment, you know.